Right, I guess this is the biennial Lee gives a talk about photography at the German Perl workshop. Yeah, so after two serious talks, I thought I'd give a slightly less serious talk. Maybe a little bit silly in points, but there's one very important point at the end, and I feel that I need to build up to it. So this is why this is more than a lightning talk. And others have talked about the coding concerns. I thought I would talk a little about something else. The image is clearly generated by generative AI. I gave it a slightly silly prompt, like a pickup truck has crashed into a building, and then it's been overgrown by cactus plants, and it's okay, I suppose. It just looks a little bit off, and little is me being generous. And Dali has obviously ignored some of my prompting, but anyway. All right, so some quotes to start. Today, everything exists to end in a photograph. This was from an essay by Susan Sontag. She wrote a series of essays in the 70s that were compiled into a book called On Photography. It's kind of like the Brooks of photography, you know, a series of essays about a thing. She was a partner of Annie Leibovitz. So Leibovitz was a photographer for Rolling Stone. So she shot a lot of music photography and portraits of musicians. And then she ended up working as fashion and editorial stuff, the likes of Vanity Fair. This is a photo from 2016, and it's bad on so many levels. It's not the projector that makes it look that bad. It just looks that bad. It does. Like, this is from 10 years ago, and to look at it now, you'd think that's generative AI, but it's not. Gary Winograd, he said, when you put four edges around some facts, you change those facts. Winograd he was the most prolific street photographer probably of all time. Between the 50s and the 80s, when he died, he had almost 10,000 rolls of film yet to be processed. That's like 250,000 photos there that he hadn't even got around to processing. He also said that you have a lifetime to learn technique, but I can teach you what is more important than technique, and that's how to see. Learn that, and all you have to do afterwards is press the shutter. And then the last quote is, "What are the gaps?" by Martin Parr this year. So Martin Parr caused a bit of a stir in the early 80s with his color photography. His work was kind of dismissed as being vernacular snapshots. Why would you shoot this kind of photography? When he joined Magnum, the people that were in Magnum were kind of a bit riled by his attempts, but he ended up being the president of that photo agency for a few years recently. All right, so getting back on topic a little bit more. So we all remember this stuff, right? Deep Blue? When IBM beat Kasparov in 97 and we all thought we were doomed and nobody would ever play chess again, you know? I mean, chess is pretty popular at the moment. Watson, a few years later, natural language stuff. I think this won Jeopardy in 2011. Siri, also 2011, but I don't think it was ever a contestant on Jeopardy. Big data. I mean, CERN have been doing that for decades. Cryptocurrencies, maybe the less said, the better at this point. Blockchain. I mean, this actually has real-world applications outside the hype. NFTs. Let's kind of pretend these never existed. Maybe that's a bit too meta. Virtual reality, but this is back. It's kind of augmented reality now. Chat assistants, incredibly annoying for power users. Micropayments, I think we can blame Visa and MasterCard that these kind of never got off the ground. The semantic web. This was the next big thing when I was doing my master's in 2003, so 21 years ago. XML, still everywhere, but kind of JSON YAML TOML has kind of eaten its lunch in a way. Rust, the language that's going to solve all our problems. Generative AI and LLMs, is this just MapReduce on steroids in a way? I don't know. They're all examples of this, right? In the Gartner hype cycle. Most of them have found real-world useful applications. Some of them are still stuck down there in the trough of disillusionment. But with generative AI, it kind of feels like we're at the top of Everest of peaks. Like this peak is like way through the roof and at the top of the building here. I mean, where are we going to go? How do we get back down from all this hype? It's been shoehorned into everything. I do mean everything. So I've been collecting a few examples of these, including editorials and news articles. So this is a pretty fair article from the beginning of the year. The hard truth about AI, it might produce some better software. I don't think that's a hard truth. I mean, yeah, it's going to produce some better software. Of course, compulsory pointless stock photo included. That's what it always looks like when we're writing code, you know. And then literally 27 minutes later from the same author, horrified by Horizon, then get ready to be totally appalled by AI. It's like the editor asked the author to shoehorn AI into a piece about Horizon. The two articles aren't at odds with one another, but the fact they were published 27 minutes apart was a bit kind of strange. So yeah, more examples of this. We use MailChimp to send out notifications of events we have at the gallery back home, and they added AI tools recently. You probably can't see it there, but if I kind of do that, it's generate your email content with AI. So what I think they do is you take the subject that you've written, they look at any body that you've written, and then they generate the body of your email. So they generated this. Hey there, warm up this evening with our Apero, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not quite right. Maybe it's too wordy, because according to our analytics, about 50% of the people that receive our emails open them. And that's exceptionally high for our sector. Normally it's around about 10%. I'm sure MailChimp have stats on this, but, you know, keep it short and to the point. Oh yeah, it needs to be in French because we're targeting a French-speaking village. So I said, write it in French. Okay, we can't do that. I was like, oh, maybe if I write the prompt in French, so il faut écrire le texte en français. It's like, no, sorry, we don't support that language. Maybe you could generate the text and then translate it. I mean, it's pretty easy to do that these days. Next, does anybody know what this is? Yeah, Darkroom something. So this is a developing tank for large format film. It's pretty niche. And I was selling a load of film kit at the end of last year, so listed this on eBay with a description. And my description basically told it what you needed to know. But eBay now has, let's have AI draft it for you. So the AI draft was a bit more wordy. And it's like Reddit comment level word salad, basically. You know, use some paragraphs or something. Anybody looking at this item on eBay would know what it is anyway. Like, nobody's stumbling across this item thinking what I really need in my life is a 4x5 developing tank. So the AI is basically pulling from existing blurbs, reviews, whatever. But it's nobody, you know, if you're looking for this, you just need to know, does it work? Is it light tight? Is it good? You don't need to be told the review, you know, the blurb, the marketing blurb. It doesn't tell us anything. And yeah, somebody pointed out that it's wrong. So it's available in color and color, you know, the American spelling and the English spelling. And you can process multiple films at once, which is not true. And apparently it's aesthetically pleasing. No darkroom equipment is ever aesthetically pleasing. It's purely functional. Yeah, exactly. Has to work in the dark. Can you see that? So yes, future-inspired flavor co-created with AI. So I get this question frequently, as I'm sure you all do. Well, you know, what do you think about all this AI stuff? Because I'm a software engineer, so I must have some compelling insight into it. And I mean, it's all right, I suppose, you know, but the burden is shifting to curation review. You know, I feel like I have to proofread and review enough stuff already. This is peak Simpsons, by the way. The best of time, it was a blurst of times. And it feels like this is the inevitable end state. A CLI that writes your commit messages for you. Never write a commit message again. So 7,500 stars on GitHub. The repo itself has an average commit length of 120 bytes. That includes the date and the author headers. So they're definitely dogfooding it. If you use a tool like this, you fail at software engineering, and I hate you. So please don't. But anyway, photography. Should we be concerned about AI photography? You know, how is generative AI going to change it? What about the criticisms and dismissals of it not being real photography? This is 2019. Person doesn't exist. I mean, person probably exists. The odds are good with 8 billion people on this planet, right? Person probably exists. Person probably exists. It's a bit like this, right? The treachery of images. René Magritte said this 95 years ago. The word is not the thing, the map is not the territory, the portrait is not the person. All photography is a lie, or at least a partial truth. Like Winograd said, when you put 4 edges around a frame, you know, some facts, you change those facts. So let's look at some of the issues around this not real photography, you know, manipulation, lies, reworking, reuse, all this kind of stuff. So this is a really sad situation, because inevitably when this photo came out about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, it was going to get torn to pieces. People are going to say it's fake, it's AI, it's been manipulated. And I saw an article about this photo that said photography is no longer evidence of anything, but that's been the case since the dawn of photography. Nothing has changed there. And is it surprising that the most PR controlled and manipulated family on the planet is going to have all their photos manipulated? No. But should we care? And the answer is no, we shouldn't care. Because every single photo you see or take is manipulated in some way. You know, it's practically impossible to take a photo on one of these without there being computational photography involved. And sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's really bad. But what we have to think about is intentions. I don't think there was any bad intentions here, just, you know, 1,000 tiny bad editing decisions that then got picked up by people that like to go over these kind of things with a 1,000% magnification in Photoshop. But you know what this photo kind of reminds me of a little bit? This is going back 90 years. This is Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange. And it came to symbolize the hunger and the poverty and the hopelessness endured by so many Americans during the Great Depression. Notice anything weird in the bottom right-hand corner? You probably can't quite see the airbrush thumb there, so there's a thumb. So there was a thumb that was removed in post because you know, the photographer wasn't happy. But it turned out the photo was actually a lie. The lady in the photo wasn't a migrant. She was actually a Native American. She was sat there waiting because her car had broken down, so she's actually quite a well-off Native American. She wasn't a victim of the Dust Bowl and the poverty and everything. Yosemite Valley, also 90 years ago, so by Ansel Adams, you know, the epochal landscape photographer. He literally wrote the books on photography, the camera, the negative, the print. They're like the Kernighan and Ritchie of photo books. He wanted to show the beauty of nature, but all of his images were heavily manipulated in the darkroom. But that's all right, I guess. He then went on to be the co-founder of the F64 group that was dedicated to the promotion of pure photography. So in their manifesto, they define it as possessing no qualities of technique, composition, or idea derived from any other art form. Which is a bit weird given that darkroom printing is a lot like painting, just with light. Do as I say, not as I do. Raising the flag. I mean, there was a lot of photos in the war of flag raising, and most of them were manipulated. The photographer supplied the flag here. I don't know how you can manipulate a scene more than that. I could have used the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima, but again, there was controversy around that. It's almost like photography can be a form of propaganda. On the left, does anybody know? So it's a portrait style magazine, but the pyramids were a bit too far apart to fit on the cover, so they just brought them together in post. The photographer was a bit pissed off about that, but it turned out later that the photographer had actually paid the camel riders to go back and forth. So manipulation before the photo is fine, but afterwards is not so fine. I don't know. On the right, Steve McCurry's Afghan Girl. So McCurry later turned out to be a serial photoshopper, literally removing entire elements from his photos. He defended this by saying, I'm not a photojournalist, which is a bit odd because he spent 40 years shooting as a photojournalist. And then he pivoted, I guess, to being a fine art photographer. Fine art being a euphemism for I can do whatever I want, you know. So Gregory Crewdson, his photographs are kind of elaborately planned, produced, and lit using lighting crews that often light studio sets and TV locations and things. So every part of this photo, every piece of light is meticulously planned, heavily influenced by paintings, films by Lynch, and so on. And he'll sell out his entire print run for a project before he's even shot the photos. And that's how successful he is. Andreas Gursky, this was produced in an edition of 6, so the Rhine. It's heavily manipulated, so all the buildings, all the people have been removed in post. The Rhine doesn't look anything like this. This was sold for $4.3 million in 2011, the most expensive photo ever sold at that point. Murray Fredericks, so his latest project involves shooting photos of the trees that look like they're on fire. He runs gas piping up the back of the tree to give that impression. So this is all done at the scene. This is not done in post. But I'm sure there's lots of post-production going on this as well. A common criticism of fine art photography is I could have shot that, but you didn't. You didn't shoot that, and that's entirely the point. Successful fine art photography is kind of largely about an idea well executed. So reuse and reappropriation, and this is one of the canonical examples. So Sam Abel shot a series of photos for the Marlboro ad campaign in the 60s and the 70s, I think it was. And then Richard Prince shot photos of his photos, but cropped them in a way that took all the text and the logos out. But Prince's picture on the right is a copy, the photograph of a copy, the advertisement of a myth, the cowboy. Prince's photos sold for millions. And Prince has been sued multiple times by artists and photographers that are upset that this is the way he works, and he's never lost a case. How about expectation versus reality? So my partner showed me this about 6 months ago, and it's clearly generative AI. I mean, without even looking at the absurd detail in the background. Like, no human would ever arrange the frames like that in the background. Like, there's a lamp that's half disappearing. But the sheer impracticality of the thing, I mean, no. 7,264 people at time of screenshot don't know or just don't care. Probably some combination of the two. AI concept art as bait. The stupidest thing I'd seen, at least that week. I mean, who looks at the picture on the left and thinks it's actually going to look like that? I mean, it's a pretty shoddy job on the right, but I mean, come on, this is absolute bait.
Photo of this I've seen on the right, like the ones I've seen in the UK media, looked like it was much worse.
Yeah, this is as good as it looks in real life on the right. Yeah, but this stuff can be done really well. So IKEA have been generating their photographs for over a decade. Every IKEA catalog is full of things that don't exist. I mean, they exist, but they're not photos of the actual things. You get what I'm saying. It can be done pretty good. I'm pretty sure that 100% of IKEA's photography is entirely generated. And stock photography is going that way. Commercial production work is going to go that way. I'm sure there's plenty of photography we see and we don't even realize that it's generated. The meaning of photography is changing. It's a discipline that is perceptually changing. This is a quote from a very good blog post about it's built on a bedrock that shifts every so often. And to be surprised that it changes is to be your own fault. 200 years ago, we had the first fixed images. Then 150 years ago, you could do it if you wanted to risk killing yourself with nasty chemicals. Then Kodak came out with the box brownie, so everybody could do it. Then we had 35mm film, and then instant film. And 50 years ago, Kodak created the first digital camera. Didn't do anything with it, unfortunately. 25 years ago, camera phones. Now, generative AI. So to summarize, you have to be a bit nuts to try this. You have to be able to afford it. You have to want to do it. You have to be there. Now you have to have an idea, at least if you want to stand out, because everybody is everywhere all the time with a camera. And taking exceptionally well composed, nicely exposed, sharp, beautiful photos isn't going to get you anywhere in the art world. It's no longer interesting. It's utterly mundane. And calling yourself an influencer doesn't change this fact. But what we have to ask is, what are the gaps? So this is Cafe Royale Books, and they publish weekly titles focusing on post-war documentary photography in Britain and Ireland mostly. This is a 6 archive box set. They produce these every couple of years. Each archive contains 100 books. Each book contains 15 to 20 unseen photographs, and photos that are often technically imperfect. You know, they're not sharp, they're not well exposed, they're crooked, out of focus. But every single book fills in the gaps. This is Martin Parr, the president of Magnum, interviewing Craig Atkinson, who is the founder of Cafe Royal Books. All the books in the background here as well are filling in the gaps. What are the gaps? You know, important and arguably interesting photography is predicated on filling in the gaps. We are awash with technically competent, boring photography, mediocrity. Generative AI for most photography is either technically incompetent or not interesting. And it's often used as filler, so I'm sure you're seeing the same as me. All these blog posts with hero images with generative AI. It's kind of not quite got to the level of mediocrity. Maybe it will soon, and maybe it'll get beyond that. But to me, it's unlikely it will ever be able to fill in the gaps. And you need to continue to ask yourself that question, not just when thinking about photography, but anywhere that you're using generative AI. What are the gaps? This is a real cactus car. I shot this in Santorini in 2023. Any questions? No? Just shock and awe.
Thanks.